That's lovely. Yeah, so...
Can you see?
Oh yeah, it's fine. Yeah, and I think we've touched on some of the other questions we've got.
Chiefly short ones, but of course we'd only those two little old buildings. I mean, the red brick cowshed, I can't remember when that was built, but prior to that we'd only those two little old buildings, so they couldn't be milking a big lot of cattle, because father originally was joiner and cabinet maker. I mean, that was his job, but I don't know when he came back to the farm, but no idea of that. But as I say, then the estate, of course it all belonged to the Melbourne estate, to the Carr family. And the estate built the red cowshed. It is red brick, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And the mixing place at the end of it. And then there was a little shed at the back where there was an engine. And my father was quite clever with his brain and his hands, and he put up a series of shafts and pulleys to work, to chop chaff, top straw up in the top of the loft over the mixing place, and downstairs it'd work a turnip pulper, and what else had we? I think that was it. And of course in those days chief cattle cake was linseed cake, and they came in long slabs like this, about that long and about that wide, and they went into a, have you seen a cake crusher at all?
No.
You do see them among the antique things at agricultural shows. You fed them into it, turned the handle, and it ground them all up to be mixed with pulled turnips or mangels, whatever you'd got. It was quite common to have a big heap of corn mixed up each night, ready for next morning. But I was trying to think this morning, we'd no dairy at the farm until the brick cowshed was built, and the little dairy was built on the edge of it. So as far as I can think, milk, not in 10-gallon churns, in those big 17-gallon ones, would be brought back to the house and down the back steps, which have gone now, and into that back room that whoever's got it now uses as a kitchen, living kitchen. I'm pretty sure I can, the old cooling things were like, how do I explain it, about that wide and about that deep, and they were on each side like this. Corrugated. And the water was inside them, came in at the top and out at the bottom, and the milk from a tub drained into a trough on the top and ran down equally the width of the cooler, and then it came out into a trough at the bottom and into another churn. But I'm certain that that must have happened because, as I say, we'd no dairy at the farm.
No.
I can't remember how it was brought from the farm to the house.
No.
That's one thing. I know it went in the milk float at the end of the garden down on the back road. There was one building divided into three, and one was where the float was kept. Next was the stable for the horse, and the next was where we kept about half a dozen calves. And in those days, calves were kept chained up like a dog with a collar round the neck and a chain to them. But that's the only sort of livestock there was near the farm.
Did you keep hens at Lathkill Old Farmhouse?
With hens on at the farm.
Yeah.
Nothing else, only a few sheep. Nothing else, all ploughing, of course, and working on the fields. The big field, the big west field as we called it, with the little, has the building gone, or is it still there?
It's gone.
Bottom of the Green Lane, that was always the ploughed field, and quite often the one below it. But all ploughing was done with a couple of horses until sometime in the 1930s. And Dad bought a tractor with iron wheels and spade lugs, as they call them. Do you know what I'm meaning? With the pieces across. And then for on the road, you had to bolt an extra band of steel on to stop them damaging the roads or run on the side on the grass verges.
How did they get rid of the milk then? Did they sell it in the village?
It used to go to Manchester to dairies in Manchester. It's quite an hit and miss business because they could send you a telegram, please keep 2 days' milk at home if they got more than they wanted. So then you had to make butter or whatever you could with it. And I mean, in the 1930s, I do remember that, milk was about 6.8p a gallon. And at that time, our milk went to Sheffield. And of course, if you got a snow, you got to get it to Bakewell or get it up to the station when it was going by train. And of course, farmers used to all club together and get one cart and quite a number of horses and dig their way through to Bakewell. I think it was about 1935 or 6. They where you come to the top of Keckstyle, as we call it, and down and round the bend, they cut through the wall on the left at the bottom and went over and came out at the bend below Burton Moor. But on one occasion they got it through to Bakewell. At that time they were sending it to Chatsworth Dairy, and blow me, the lorry got stuck with it in Chatsworth Park in the snow, and all of it was condemned. So Father said he'd never dig his way to Bakewell again. He'd throw it down the drain first. But I mean, the Milk Board was the salvation of dairy farmers, and it's the biggest pity out that it's gone. I mean, they had to fight to get it, and it's just been taken away. We've no sort of bargaining now, and it's
the big building that's on the far side of the farm, can you remember what used to be kept in there?
Whereabouts, are you meaning?
The one near the Twindales. You know, the big...
Oh, at the far... Well, young stock were in there. I obviously, I mean, they must have been in winter time. Must have been. Because that was the only other building than those two in the yard. And I mean, what room there was in those, there'd be milk cows in, wouldn't there?
Yeah. Do you remember going into that building when there was stock in it?
At near the Twindles? I used to go regular, yes.
Because it's getting derelict now, and I just wondered what the atmosphere in the building was like.
Well, it was divided up, wasn't it,
Mm.
into 2 or 3 different lots. I can't remember a lot about it, but it was, I suppose the young stock were always on that land on there.
Mm.
Mm.
Now, what else have we want to?
It's a pity it's gone, isn't it? I mean, now they're doing a lot of work on these odd buildings, because I feel they must be traditional to Derbyshire. You don't, perhaps up north you see them,
Mm.
but you don't see them in any of the southern counties.
No. Well, I think they're quite an important thing to keep.
Mm.
And I've taken quite a lot of photographs of them, really.
Yeah,
And some of the other ones that are around the village have overhad,
yes.
because I thought it was quite interesting.
I mean, in the early days, of course, people went to work and then just had a few animals, and I can think of people, you could see them going with the buckets to where the buildings were.
Mm. A great uncle of mine used to call it a wheelbarrow farm, because they used to just have one cow and one pig
Yeah,
and a few chickens.
yes.
And
Well, in Overhampton, I mean, Mr. Oldfield, Joe's father, hadn't a lot of course he had to go to the First World War. He had a rough time then. But, I mean, he started with, I can't think just which pieces of land it was, but we used to laugh if ever Dad got delayed, it was him and Mr. Oldfield nattering on the lane as they met. But I think it's had some that you've got on the
Yes.
left-hand side,
yes, that's right.
farther along when,
There was the wild goose slade and the Oldfield slade.
some of those strips down.
Mm.
I'm sure he'd have feel, and I'm not sure if Mr. Wright Harold Wright didn't have two of those strips down there.
Mm.
Can't remember for sure.
Mm.
Another man, Fritz Godfrey, I can't think where he had. Perhaps he only had poultry, but I'm sure he'd a building somewhere.
Mm.
Perhaps going down, what is the one on that lane going down into the village?
Yes, there
On
is.
the right, yes. Mm.
Mm. What was it like living in the village?
Well, different to it is today. I mean, there was no entertainment whatever. You made your own entertainment. One was drive and dance on Boxing Day, and that was about all. And of course, there was only the school to use for entertainment. Everybody walked to school. I mean, the teachers walked from Bakewell, and they were hardly ever missing in my memory.
Mm.
And they walked up Ditch Cliff, do you call it,
Mm.
up the fields, because Mrs. Hill lived just at the bottom, at the top of Bakewell, up off Yeld Road.
I don't think we got it on tape. What sort of dairy cattle were it that you kept?
Well, there were short-horn cattle, and then in possibly 1930s we started using a Frisian bull. I think Father brought his first bull from the Smedley farm up on Farley, and then he bought one from down at Spondon area, I think it was. But that improved the milk yield of the shorthorns, and quite a few of them would be a nice blue, mottle blue, rather like the blue Albions that were quite prevalent in Derbyshire at one time.
Your grandfather liked to show shorthorns, didn't he? Am I right in thinking?
I don't think he ever did.
Who showed shorthorns then? It wasn't your grandfather then?
I don't know.
No.
Can't think. Grandfather used to show poultry more than
Poultry.
anything. He kept all sorts of years and years ago. I never remember it, but kept no end of fancy breeds of poultry. Grandmother used to keep bees and so on. I mean, they did all sorts of things to keep body and soul together in those days. Of course, the village, there wasn't a complete water supply in the village. The last tap on the water supply was against the front gate of the old farmhouse in the village. Everybody else below there had to come with buckets and carry the water from that tap.
So how did the stock get watered on the farm then?
Well, with ponds more than anything, but it always was a big problem. And I think it caused a lot of disease among the cattle because they hadn't got clean water. Because when a mere gets low, they're going into it to drink and they soil the edges. There was the one pond at the farm where you've got a building now, haven't you? And there was one in the hollow on Monash Road, is that still there?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But we used to cart water for them. It was the ones at the far land that were the biggest problem. We used to cart water from the tap at Overhaddon. They'd put a trailer there with, I'm going back to the 1920s, 30s, so I can't just remember. Father used to, we actually bought a car in 1921, and it was a Chevrolet car with open top, with what I call a pram hood. And he adapted it. He had the seats cut off it at level and then put a wooden body on it. So after he'd got that, he could take the milk to Bakewell station or anything on this open. I think eventually he built a wooden and canvas sort of cover for the two front seats, but he could take the milk with that rather than with a horse and trap.
And that's how he moved the water as well then, is it?
Pardon?
Did he move the water on the back of that as well?
Could have done. I just can't remember that, because I can't think of anything. I can remember it was my job to fill the churns, you see, and they'd put a vehicle of some kind outside the gate at the front, and I'd be responsible for filling churns with water. But I can't just remember how they were transported onto the land. But it was chiefly the ones on at the far end of the farm that were the problem.
What sort of crops did you grow?
Oats and wheat, potatoes, turnips and mangels. I think that was chiefly the things we grew. Then of course wheat had to be thrashed, wheat and oats had to be thrashed, and the thrashing machine belonged to William Twigg at Matlock, and it used to start from Matlock and work its way up the valley and finish off at Overhand with a big steam engine pulling the thrashing machine. And of course that meant quite a bit of work both inside the house and outside. Neighbours were always good coming to give a hand, because you needed about 11 or 12 men to really run a thrashing machine, dealing with the straw and the grain and the chaff and carting it away. But and of course all used to troop in for the dinner, and that meant quite a bit of cooking and preparation. And of course that went on until the war years. We thrashed up at Hurst Farm at Matlock during the war years. But I remember the thrashing machine, I think it was about in the early 1920s, getting stuck in the snow in that big Westfield on at the far end of it, and they had to bring another engine from Matlock to tow them out. And of course the Irishmen used to come most years. They'd work their way down from Lancashire down through Derbyshire, and they'd do they'd work with the thrashing machine, or they'd do jobs on the farm that wanted doing, and sleep rough in one of the barns.
Mm. So big changes to what we do nowadays.
Unbelievable. Absolutely.
Having all the family at Lathkill Farm in the summer was a happy time for me. What did it mean to you?
It was lovely that everybody turned up. I thought it was wonderful. When I compare the situation with some families that I know, have a lot to be thankful for. Yeah.
Do you think your dad would have been pleased?
He would. He would have been very pleased.
Did he like Overhaddon?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's where everybody was brought up, and the only sort of day of going from the village was Monday, the market day, and farmers' wives walked down to Bakewell and to do the shopping on the Monday, and often enough that would be the only day they went out, other than just going to chapel on a Sunday.
So what decided your father to leave Overhaddon?
I think they wouldn't build us a house. That was one thing. I mean, we all had bicycles. I've carted, I can dare to say, hundreds of meals from the village to the farm or on into the plough field, because Dad would go at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and he'd stop in that field all day, and we'd take him his breakfast, his dinner, and sometimes his tea as well. And I used to carry them on the handlebars of my bicycle, and anything that was wanted, it was me that did it on the whole. But one funny thing, when they were building that new cowshed, there was an old man out of the village named one of the Bibby family, and he liked his drink, and going down it all seems different to me, but we went through the gate and the road went straight down. Going down the road towards it, whether this old Mr. Bibby was helping on building this cowshed, I don't know, but I fell and of course smashed a bottle of beer. And he says, I'd rather have seen Bakewell Church steeple fall down than that last break that bottle. But it was a nuisance, not living on the farm, absolute nuisance.
Mm. So how long do you think, what do you think the earliest time was that the wild gooses had been connected with Lathkill Farm?
But we left in 1938, and I think the thing was they wouldn't build us a house, and of course John would be nearly 20, you but 2 years younger, and the farm wasn't, and Charles was still at home. So the farm really wasn't big enough for 4 men, although it wasn't mechanised, of course, like it is today.
What other family members lived in the village?
Well, in my memory, there was only the wild gooses at New Close, Uncle Joseph and his family. And then when he died, of course there was his daughter, Mrs. Lytle, and her husband farmed it until the Pierces took over. But there were no other family members in the village. But what is amazing to me in the census, I don't know, 1861 I've got, and I've got, I think, up to perhaps 1901. But the majority of those census forms, there was 40 wild gooses in the village, which is an amazing thing. You just wonder where they've all gone.
So were they all related, all those wild gooses?
Oh, well, possibly they were. Or Wild Gust, I think someone was called. But to have 40, it was perhaps in 1890, and then 20, 30 years later, there's just, there was 7 of us, and 2 or 3 at New Close. You just wonder where they've all gone to. I came across a wild goose. He lives, I think he's David Wild Goose. He lives near Ashby-de-la-Zouch, I think it is, and he's been in quite big businesses, open gas coal mining and all sorts of things. And I said to him, how do we come to be related? And he explained that we were related to through a Samuel Wild Goose who lived at New Close. No, not New Close, because New Close wasn't there. But my great-grandfather was Benjamin Wild Goose, and he was the first wild goose, or the first person to live at New Close after the house was built. And Samuel was his father, so Samuel must have lived in the village. And this David was most interested in his ancestry. Not a bit like a wild goose to look at, quite a few are, but not a bit like a wild goose. But he'd be sort of distant cousin I haven't worked out, but with the same great-grandfather. Great-great-grandfather, sorry.
Very good. Oh well, that's wonderful. I think we've got lots of things to use then. Can you think of anything we've not asked?
I don't know, I don't think go on to the next page.
Mm.
Don't you have another page?
I've looked at, yeah, but she seems to have touched on everything that I was interested in knowing about. And then the only thing is any other implements, you know, did like ploughing, was it with horses that they ploughed? And
On just the single furrow plough and harrows, which you link together but with the spikes on about that long behind the horses. And a plough for ridging, a ridging plough for ridging up the ridge to put potatoes in. We grew potatoes regularly and used to sell them to the greengrocer and bakery. Then of course the harvest, the haymaking, haymaking has changed so much. There've been the mowing machine and the tedder and the swath turner and the horse rake. And in those days somebody went round the edges of every field with a scythe and mowed all the hedges bits out, and you raked it all out as well. You didn't leave, and then even went round when they were picking the rakings up, the bits up, with what was called a bonnet rake, which was a big rake with, I should think a set of teeth about at least 2 yards long, or more than that, big teeth like that, that a man used to pick up the final remains of the hay.
were the crops as heavy as they are nowadays?
I would think so. Corn, same as wheat now, they go for it small, don't they? So there isn't a lot of straw. But in those days, wheat would be up to a person's shoulders. We won prizes with growing crops of wheat.
That's good. Tell us about. I think we've about got it, really, haven't we?
Brought to introduce. So.
Yes. If you could introduce yourself and tell us the names of your parents, that would be good. Because we'll edit all this and put it all round the way we want it. When you were born?
Well, I was born in 1916, and we lived at the cottage in Overhaddon until 1919. Then, of course, when Mother died, we moved to the farmhouse to my grandparents, and I went to school from the farmhouse to the village school all the time till I was 14. And after that I worked sort of on the farm and in the house and so on. Things were different to they are today. Very different in the farmhouse. Monday was wash day and everything had to be done by hand. The copper to boil the clothes, and you couldn't wash white clothes without they were boiled, and the copper was out in the backyard, not even a roof over it. and so you had to set to and empty the rainwater out of that before you put clean water in and lit the fire. And of course all the heating was coal fires, and an open grate which you could sort of toast by and all the rest of it, but it had to be lit and cleaned out every morning. That was always Father's job, to light the fire when he got up before he went milking.
I think that's lovely, don't you?
Yep, that's great.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Now we could just do with whizzing you up to over having to take your picture outside the farmhouse. But it's alright, we can manage. Have you got any old pictures at all?